Yesterday, when I started, I told you that we will be covering things related to when variables are cardinal. That means you have income of say 1,000 rupees. You know, 1,000 is twice as much as 5,000 and so on. Scale of variables, they're quite important. Yeah. There are different kind of scale. You can, even in cardinal scale, you can have ratio scale. Ratio scale means you have where zero means something. Zero means nothing. It means something, right? And whether you take, say, rupees, convert into pound, double means double, triple means triple, and so on. Yeah. There is something called an interval scale. Yeah, where zero may not make much sense. Take the example of temperature. Suppose you move from 0 degree centigrade to 5 degree centigrade. Can you say, or say 1 degree centigrade to 5 degree centigrade? Can you say today the temperature is 5 times higher? Suppose yesterday it was 1 degree and today it is 5 degree. Can you say that temperature is 5 times higher? Why not? So the idea is that if you just convert from centigrade to Fahrenheit, you do not have that 5 times higher. 1 degree centigrade will be around 33 degrees Fahrenheit. 5 degrees centigrade will be around 42 degrees Fahrenheit. So 1 degree to 5 degrees centigrade, fine, looks like 5 times. But then when you go to Fahrenheit, not 5 times anymore. So in temperature, we cannot take ratios. Ratios doesn't make any sense. So we have to only deal with interval. The interval makes sense there. Similarly, there are two other forms of scale. One is called ordinal scale or ordered categorical scale, where you know something is better than the other. You know that, getting a first division is better than a second division better than a third division. Or you can say that somebody is very happy versus somebody is moderately happy, somebody is unhappy. But if I ask you, okay, if I compare a person who is very happy versus somebody is moderately happy, can you say how many times happy the very happy person is? No, know that one is better than the other, but we have no way of assigning any particular scale. The final one is categorical, nominal categorical scale. You are talking about when you are walking through the road, you say, okay, how many red cards do I see? How many blue cards do I see? Okay. Am I taking up, how many people are taking a bus versus how many people are riding a motorbike? You do not know which one is better, which one is worse, but you have just different categories. That's nominal scale. We typically have 4 different types of scale. So when we are talking about, say, monetary property or the monetary values, consumption expenditure, you use cardinal scale, the ratio scale, where 0 makes sense. 0 means 0, nothing. 5 is 5 times larger than 1. 10 is twice as large as 5. You can do all sorts of division. Yeah. However, you have situation where it could be in energy poverty, it could be I will give you an example of the WASH program. Yeah, in health. Variables are ordinal. You know the order. You know that one order is better than the other. One category is better than the other. But you cannot assign any number. Question is, how can we assess poverty in this kind of situation? Yeah. So I thought it's a good opportunity to just look at this situation for your own knowledge or for your own applicability before we move on to multidimensional aspects from tomorrow. We'll still learn in a single variable world. Yeah. So this is how they look like. So ordinal variables, they are categorical variables, but they have a natural order. And only the order matters. Difference between the categories do not have any meaning. I mean, you will see when you are coding the data, if you have these categories, they are coded as 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on, right? And sometimes people just take average, people run regressions. It's wrong. Actually, it's wrong. People do it, that's fine, but you should not be able to do it. It's incorrect. So here's an example of self-reported health categories. And you have seen, if you have worked on health, you have often worked with these self-reported categories, right? Suppose you have these three categories: good health, regular health, and poor health. The question is, how much larger regular health is compared to poor health? I mean, I know in data it is coded as, they are coded as 1, 2, and 3. But the difference of these 3 minus 2, 1, 2 minus 1, 1 doesn't make any sense in our practical world, right? Okay. So the question is, then all the things that we learned yesterday, normalized gap, squared gap, doesn't make much sense here. You cannot apply those tools. Yeah. So what kind of tools we may need? Okay. So before we proceed, let's try to understand a bit of how distributions and densities, how they look like. You had an exercise, right? The first exercise, if you look at the first question, you are asked to draw the cumulative distribution, one-time function, right? And you saw that it was a step function. Yeah. So suppose I even give you lesser number of categories here. Yeah. So we have probability masses. So we have three different, say, societies, or however you say, society A, society B, society C, and we have these three different kind of distributions. So the first one is called probability masses. So you have three categories. As I said, it would be health categories: poor, regular, and good. In the first one, you have 1/3 of the people in the first category, 1/3 of the people in the second category, 1/3 in the third category. Okay. In society B, half of the population are in the first category, that means they're bad, and half of them are good. And for example, no one in the middle category. This is how they should look. And in society C, everybody is in the bad category. So this is how. So does it make sense? This, you understand how the probability masses should be read. Yes. So you have three categories, and you have the proportion of people in each categories. That's the information we generally have for categorical variables, ordered categorical variables, or ordinal variables. We have nothing else. We do not have any number. In income world, you have the number. When you draw your cumulative distribution, you have 16,000, 15,000, and so on. Here, nothing. Here, you only have three categories, which is poor, regular, and good. And you only have the proportion of people in each category. And that's it. So once you have that, these are called probability masses in different categories. And if you draw the cumulative distribution, look, how am I drawing? Doing the cumulative distribution, the poorest one, you have 1/3. How many people in the two poorest category? 1/3 plus 1/3, 2/3. How many of them are in the bottom three categories? 1/3 plus 1/3 plus 1/3. Always has to be equal to 1. Right? Probability, the highest probability is 1, right? So if you do the cumulative distribution for society A is going to be 1/3, 2/3, and 1. Does it make sense? Yes or no? Yeah. Similarly, if you have society B, look, the cumulative distribution looks like half plus 0. Again, half plus half, 1. And for the third one, everybody is in the bottom category. So whether you ask what fraction of population in the bottom category, 100%. What fraction of population in the bottom two categories, 100%. What fraction of the population in bottom three categories, 100%. These are all 100, right? So you have a cumulative distribution as 1, 1, and 1. Okay, clear? Now, if you draw the picture, this is how they look like. So, you have here, some of you may not be able to see, so please have a look at the screen. Let's see if I can use the cursor. Yeah, so this one. So if you are looking at PA, and you have these three categories: not too happy, pretty happy, and very happy. Yeah, if you have that, 1/3 is not too happy. There you go, 1/3. Then again, 1/3 pretty happy, 1/3, and so very happy. There you go, 1/3. Yeah. For the second one, similarly, you have 50% mass here and 50% mass here, no mass in the middle. And for the third one, you have 100% mass over here. Okay. Now, if you draw the cumulative, so what fraction in the bottom category? Fine. 33. How many people are there in the bottom two categories? There you go. 33 plus 33. There you go. How many in the bottom three categories? All them together? This is how it is. So again, we are talking about cumulative distribution, but in the discrete world. You see, they're going up. They cannot just go down. The cumulative distribution always have to go up at least. It cannot fall. But a different shape. We had a question yesterday, right? Why the particular shape? Look, they can take different shape. This one is just linear, going up like this. This one is going straight and then going up. And this one is just flat. So it depends on the situation, depends on the distribution. I have no control over it. Sounds good? Okay. So this is how generally we have the data, what to do with it. So I will try to show you with an example. So here is an example of sanitation deprivation from the WASH program. If you are working on health, you have seen this WASH, right? So in general, we have water, sanitation, and hygiene. These are three, right? So it is just an example with the sanitation level. So suppose we have these 5 different categories. So we have safely managed. We know this is the best option and we should have that ideally. Then we have basic, then you have limited, unimproved, and open defecation. So we know somehow the order. This is the order I have taken from the WASH program itself. They're color coded. Green, they are considered better. I'm just assuming that the dark green is the safest option. Otherwise, all 4 of them, they reflect some level of deprivation. But we know that open defecation reflects the largest possible deprivation. Unimproved, yes, better than probably open defecation, but still reflect deprivation. Limited, again, better than the last 2 categories, but still reflect deprivation, and so on. Different levels of deprivation. Yeah. But we cannot just assign theta. It may be coded as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but they do not make any sense. Yeah, they're just coded so that you differentiate them. That's what they're all about. And this is some data from Bangladesh Demographic Health Survey for 2007, 2011, and 2014. So what I will be discussing today, the methodology, the technique, the example, they are available from a paper that we published in 2021 in World Bank Economic Review. So again, if you just type the last name and thing, you should be able to find. If you do not find, just let me know. I'll be happy to share it. Yep. So if you look at this entire table, you will see you have this. Of course, I just somehow when we wrote the paper, it got reversed. So there is open defecation, the worst, unimproved, second worst, third worst, and so on. And this one, you have the improved version. Yeah. And if you look from the DHS data set, 2007, 2011, to 2014, you can see how, so they sum up to 100%. Yeah. These columns, they sum to 100%. Okay. And they are reported standard errors over there because you are working on survey, you should have a standard error. Yeah. So these are, you can see the color coded how things have gone down slowly in each category. Here you can see the improved one, they are actually improving. So it looks like open these sanitation facilities, they're actually improving, at least in this highest category. Similar trend follows here. Select, if you see for some reason from the data, again, I'm not an expert on Bangladesh, I do not know exactly why, but if you look at open defecation, between 2007 and 2014, actually it has gone up. So select is a situation where you have improvement. You have proportion of people with improved facility increasing from 30 to 35 to 45. But at the same time, open defecation has also gone up. I mean, I have spoken to some people. Some of them say, it's the data anomaly. The DHS had problem in collecting data. Some people say, no, there was a cyclone or whatever that may have caused. I do not know, but this is what we observe from data. So I will just go with the data. Data shows that they have gone up. Question is, how should we measure poverty so that this kind of increase in this worst form of deprivation can be captured to your poverty measure? Yeah. So I start with the example. At the end, I will revisit the example again and see how we are measuring and how things are changing. Yep. Okay. So let's look at some notation. Basic notation. So I showed you the example of happiness scale, sanitation scale. You probably can come up with some scale in your own research area. Anything, any other variables that you think of would have ordered categorical scale or ordered scale that you have come across?
Education like postgraduate.
Okay, fair enough. Educational status, postgraduate, higher education, secondary education, and so on. Anything else?
Depression and mental health.
Mental health, yes, that's fine.
Source of drinking water.
Source of drinking water, I just didn't present. It's included in the WASH program, but absolutely. Anything else?
Type of employment like actually like got all 6 on.
If you can order them, for example, if you are talking about casual labor, agricultural labor, and so on, we do not know which one is better. Or there you have a mix of ordered category, ordered and nominal together. It's a much more difficult. If you can order them, for example, you are saying government employees, high-level government employees, they are really better than low-level government employees. They could be better than, if you can order them, that's fine. Otherwise, it can be complicated. Anything else? Affordability of?
Like solar panel, affordable, somewhat available.
If you have, you can rank them. Yes, that would work. There you go. But you could do, but we are trying to work in household deprivation level. Yeah, but you are absolutely right. You could do. That is an example. Something else? Huh? BMI. Yeah, if you categorize them as severely undernourished.
Obese and overweight.
Yes, but then now would obese be worse or acute undernutrition would be worse? Which one? Now, BMI is a strange case where you go up and again go down. So you have to do. Now you may have an argument that obese and severely undernourished, they're equally bad. Overweight or just mild undernourished, they're equally bad. If you make that argument, that's fine. Otherwise, we do not know the exact order.
It depends on like the work which we are doing. Suppose we are doing work from malnourishment.
Malnourishment is different. Obese is also malnourishment. Undernutrition is also malnourishment. Now, if you are focusing on a developing country, you will focus on undernourishment. You will say, look, overweight, obese, they're not a problem because this country people cannot have enough food. Agreed. You can do that. So great. You can see. So there are so many examples. Where any examples from energy? Source of cooking fuel. Absolutely. If you can order them, biomass fuel and so on. Yeah, you can use that. So you can see, so there are different applications where you can have this kind of ordered categorical scale. Yeah. Okay, let's go ahead. So suppose then we have mathematical notation. So suppose we have these categories, this scale, they are, I just note as C1, C2, and up to Cs. We have a population size of N, and achievement of one person is assigned to each category. Earlier we had, in yesterday's lecture, we had X1, X2 up to Xn, all different incomes. But here, people are just sharing categories. Right? You may have N people, but you have, say, S category, suppose S equal to 5. You have 5 categories. To these all people, 1 million people, they're just sharing only those 5 categories. So you can actually observe only this CS number of categories. Okay? And PS is just the proportion of people falling in that particular category. So you have 100% of the population, say 10% in open defecation, 20% in another category, and so on. Sum total will be 100%. Yeah? Now, these are things you require that are policy relevant requirements. Yeah, so let's go through. So this kind of gives us, I keep on telling you again and again since yesterday, first you need to decide what you need. Then you choose a measure. You do not choose a measure and then think what this measure can do or don't. That's a bad approach. First, you decide what you need. First, if you decide, you already know that your variance is categorical, you should know all the tools we learned yesterday, they're invalid. You cannot use Gini coefficient to understand inequality. You cannot just simply use FGT to compute poverty measures. It's not going to work. So if you are in a categorical world, fine, you have to think, you have to be innovative, you have to think about what kind of tools to use. So we cannot be blind to measurement. We have to first decide what we need. Then we should go and try to choose measures. Okay? So what do we need here? Of course, we want to whatever poverty figures we get, we need them to be comparable across group and across time. We need to aggregate them to come up with a figure because a single figure is very powerful. We cannot just leave. Imagine we have these 5 categories, and for India, you have 29 regions. So you have this big table where you have 5 categories, probability distributions and numbers, and then you add 3 more years. Then 29 times 5 times 3, and you give them to a policymaker analyze. They'll get bonkers. They'll say, what am I going to do all this data? So you need to be able to summarize them, aggregate them to create a graph, a meaningful graph, right? Additive decomposability, because most of the time people are interested in studying across subgroups, across rural, urban regions, across gender of the head of the household, and so on. So you should be able to break down that poverty measure. Now, this one is very important. Yesterday, we learned why we should not just focus on headcount ratio, why we should look at this gap and beyond, right? Because otherwise, you do not know the situation of the people that are improving, even if they're in poverty. But here, we do not have such kind of things. We cannot just increase people's income by 5 pounds, 10 pounds. Here, people can just move to categories. They can move from open defecation, the poorest category, to the second poorest category. The question is, if you have given some money to the policymaker to help them, you'd like to go and evaluate, have you helped them really? So people and policymaker would like to show you, yes, we have made people move from open defecation to, we have not got them out of poverty, but we have moved them 1 category up. And that should be reflected in your poverty measure. The question is, how do we capture depth here? Because we do not have FGT where, we are using the numbers. This one, we call it precedence to poor, but this is related to what we discussed as transfer, right? Remember? We said that it's only poverty measures that satisfy transfer that will assess the poorest of the poor. You had an exercise. Did you try your exercise? You had a question in your exercise. You have this money, how to distribute among the poor, right? It's FGT or a transfers, poverty measure satisfying transfer principle that will help the policymaker or force the policymaker to assess the poorest of the poor first. Yeah, same concept we use here. We call precedence. Precedence to poorer people. That means how do we ensure, how do we design a measure so that the policymaker will give more incentive, we give incentive to the policymaker to help the poorest first. We call this concept here precedence to poorer people. That means you are giving priority to poorer people. Yeah. And then, of course, you want it to be easily interpretable. It lies between 0 and 1 and so on. So these are the features you want in your poverty measure. Question is, what kind of poverty measure, how we can design it so that we can understand it better, yet it is meaningful. Okay. So in the paper, when we are doing, we said, okay, let's make sure that the poverty measure, besides other utility properties, it satisfies 3 key properties which are very crucial in the realm of ordinal variables. Yeah. So the first one is called ordinal monotonicity. Do you remember what was the monotonicity property yesterday from yesterday in poverty? Can anyone remember? Louder, please. Somebody speaking or? You are sorry, you had your mouth and I didn't realize you were even talking. It's okay, it's okay. Go ahead, please.
Basically, monotonicity is nothing else to like more is preferable, and in our case, we prefer that if you are going to the achievement of one state that is consistent over the other state, if that is more in any way of dimension of the other one.
You gave a really complicated answer. Monotonicity
simply is saying more is preferable.
Monotonicity is saying that if a poor person's income goes up, poverty goes down.
Yeah.
Okay? Very simple. If a poor person's income goes up, everything else unchanged, poverty will go down, right? In ordinal world, you can only jump categories. If your situation improves, that means you move from one category to the other, right? So in case of ordinal monotonicity, it says if the living standard of a poor person improves, so that the person moves a category of less deprivation, that means a poor person is moving from a poorer category to a less poorer category. If that happens, poverty should fall. Yeah. Second one is single category deprivation, which says whenever there is only one category reflecting poverty, then poverty measure should be equal to the headcount ratio. Think of a situation where you had 5 categories for the sanitation variable, right? Suppose we are saying, you know what, or you can say, the open defecation is the only category that reflects poverty. Other categories, I do not believe they reflect poverty. Fine. So you have only one category that reflects poverty, right? If that is the situation, that is equivalent to a headcount ratio. You do not have to. There is no depth, right? You have not more than one category, just one category reflecting the poverty, right? Then your poverty measure should simply be headcount ratio. It doesn't make any sense to create something else. So if you have one category, single category deprivation, then your measure should be headcount ratio. No more complicated. Yeah. Focus. What was the idea of focus yesterday? What was focus property? Focusing on whom? So if there is an increase in the income of the non-poor, poverty should not change. That was focus yesterday, right? Here we have an equivalent definition. Ceteris paribus, that means everything else unchanged. A change in a non-poor person's situation should not alter societal poverty evaluation as long as the non-poor person remains the same status. So again, if a non-poor person's situation changed, the person doesn't become poor, poverty evaluation should not change. Which makes sense, right? And then you have subgroup decomposability. You already know what it is because if you have different groups, if you have male-headed household and female-headed households, and you know their poverty rates or their level of poverty, the overall poverty should be the population weighted sum of the poverty of the subgroup. That's what it is. Yeah. If you have north and southern regions, the poverty in north, poverty in south, then total poverty is going to be population share of north times poverty, their poverty, plus population share of south, their poverty. That's it. Yeah. Okay. Now, if those properties are satisfied, this is how. So we have the population distribution is given by T01 to PS. That means proportion of population in each category. This is what we already know, given to us. Poverty line, suppose, is the K8 category. Yeah. So for this open definition example, you have 5 categories, and I could say, only improved category it's non-poor. Rest of them reflect some level of deprivation. And I know the order. Yeah. So my PK here will be the second category, reflecting deprivation, right? And so P1, PK, here you go, they are poor, and PK to PS, they are non-poor. Yeah. If that is the situation, so this first K category reflecting poverty, the rest of them reflecting non-poor, if you have a general situation, then it looks like if we want those four properties to be satisfied, it turns out our poverty measure is simply equal to, so you have these categories S1 to S2. You have some sort of weights. I will talk about the restriction on the weights. These are weights and these are probability masses. So this is your poverty measure. So you have the probability masses. You assign weights to different categories. And your poverty measure is the weighted sum of those probability masses. That satisfies the properties I just discussed. It's decomposable because it's just summation. You just divide them into different groups. Decomposable, that means it's output consistent as well. Yeah. It lies between 0 and 1. Restriction on the weights. I will talk about the weights. Yeah. If you have only one category, it goes to head count ratio. So if you have those probability masses, you can simply add them up with some weights, and that becomes a poverty measure. How wonderful is that? No complications. Okay. Now the question is, what are these weights? Turns out, weights on the poorest category should be equal to 1. Because if this is 1 and you have only one category of deprivation, then your poverty measure is just equal to P1, which is the head count ratio. And then for the subsequent categories as you go, the weights just have to be lower and lower. So the poorest category receives a weight of 1. The second poorest category needs the slightly smaller weights. Third category, again, smaller weight and so on. And if the particular category does not reflect deprivation, then you have 0. You do not assign any weights to them because you do not care. You have one focus, right? Remember, for normalized gap, those with not having poverty, non-poor, they had a normalized gap of 0. Same thing here. If you have the non-poor categories, they all receive a weight of equal to 0. The poorest category receives a weight of 1. And all the subsequent categories, as they reflect less deprivation, you have lesser and lesser weight. So 1, 0.9, 0.8, and so on. And those who are non-poor receives a weight of 0. That's your poverty measure in ordinal context. As simple as that. Does it look complicated?
But who will decide, sir, what will be the below this weight from 0 to 1, like 6.8, 0.9? Who will decide?
Who will decide? You as a researcher.
But how will they decide?
What is the criteria, sir?
Don't always just try to get one answer from everyone. No. You will, there will be more restriction on weight. It's not finished yet. I'm coming. Whether it is going to be 8 or 9, it doesn't matter. You assign anything. It satisfies. At the end, what you need to do, you need to test for dominance. That's what you need. You just the way you asked, and that's the common thing that people ask. When you set a poverty line, who will set the poverty line? Who sets our poverty line? Who sets our poverty line? Government does. How do they do? And do you agree with them? No, we do not agree with them. If we did, the Tendulkar committee and Rangarajan committee would have come up with the same poverty line. They did not. You appoint another committee, they will come up with another poverty line. The question is, although we believe and life would have been so good if we had just one answer to the questions, it does not. So the mind should be, I'm giving you the restrictions. You can choose any weights in them. Any weights is permissible. What you need to do, you need to conduct robustness first. That's why we did dominance analysis, because we do not believe in any poverty line. No poverty line can be defensible. So you have to do that range of poverty line to test whether your comparison holds for the range of poverty line. Does it make sense? It's a valid question. What should be it? As if I'm the God, I have the answer, I give it to you. I don't. I'm giving you the restrictions. Within this restriction, anything is permissible. You use it, and if you are not happy with a particular choice, do a robustness test. This is how it should be. Okay, but I will show you some examples, but you will ask me, trust me, why did you choose this poverty line? Why did you choose this weight? But at least what you know here, whatever weights you choose, they have to satisfy this restriction. They must satisfy this restriction. So I'm not telling you, oh, your weight could be 1,250,000. I'm not saying your weight could be 1,230. You know, they are all gone. They are not physical weights. I'm summarizing weights are going to be less than between 0 and 1, but with these restrictions. Okay, that is already summarizing your weights quite a lot. But we will add some other properties and you will see there will be further restrictions. But within the restriction, you can choose any weights you want.
So,
Yeah.
Can the restrictions be challenged? I mean, are they sacrosanct? The restrictions.
Which restrictions?
The restrictions which you put on like by before giving weights.
They are proven by the theorem. They are mathematically proven weights.
Can they be challenged or not? That's what I'm saying.
This restriction, if you challenge this restriction, you have to show that I have done mathematically something wrong. It is possible you change the assumption. You do not like my assumptions, for example. You change the assumption, then you can get a different weight. But under the assumption that I made, did they appear reasonable to you? If they appear reasonable to you, then that's the weight, that's mathematically proven. That's what you do. Yeah? If you change some of the assumptions, if you have good reason to change some of the assumptions, you may get slightly different weights. But if you agree with the assumptions, these are the only restrictions that you are going to get. That's called characterization. That's very important. So you come up with your assumptions, and this is the philosophy. You come up with your assumptions, and then you get your poverty measure. It's not you use a poverty measure. For example, in the context of bounded variables, suppose you want to calculate inequality. You use Gini coefficient. And then you are saying, oh, but people ask Gini coefficient, I use generalized entropy, I use this and that, fine. It turned out all of them are wrong measures. What is the point in doing robustness test? You are doing robustness test using wrong measures. You see? So first decide what you need. Just like here, we decided these are things what we need. Then there you go, you get the poverty measure. This is called a characterization. You prove based on that, this is the only possible measure that you can get. This is the only possible recipe. Now, let me go ahead and add some more features. We have not introduced priority. We have not said what kind of weights will prioritize the policymakers to help the poorest of the poor. Let me go through it, and then we'll come back again. And yeah.
Sir, my question is, in these things, we have one set of population like one poor and non-poor. At the same time, we are also assessing different compositions of the poorness, like different categories. So in this case, the weights are because of with respect to their poor status. Like they are poor and they are getting more and more weight compared to the non-poor.
No, poorest get a weight of 1. This is the poorest category. Get a weight of 1.
What about the other categories within that course set? They have.
That is what I'm showing. So if suppose you have 3 categories reflecting deprivation. Most poor, slightly less poor, slightly less poor. Right? You have 3 different categories reflecting deprivation. Agreed? So you get the poorest category gets a weight of 1. Then the second poorest category gets a slightly less weight. Third poorest category gets a slightly less weight. And then non-poor gets no weight at all.
So that is one part of our discussion. Second part is when we are deciding about one person is poor, we are also accounting different components into that. In large set of components, let's say our open education and.
Give me a concrete example. Instead of abstract, take an example of sanitation deprivation and give me the example in terms of sanitation deprivation.
in my sense, like I'm taking into consideration, let's say our one household is poor, if they are consuming less clean energy, they are using open defecations and they don't have that much education.
Oh, wait, you are going to multiple deprivation.
Yeah, on
No,
that.
wait, I have not gone there yet, dear. I'm going to multiple deprivation tomorrow. This is still one. This is still one dimension.
Okay.
We are still in one-dimensional world. We will go there tomorrow. Don't worry, I'm not running away. I will come back to you. We will talk about it tomorrow. Sounds good. So today we are just focusing on single category, single variable, but if it is ordinal. But then Pratap will go through some of the data, and then from tomorrow, the entire day we will focusing on multiple deprivations, what are their problems, what are their challenges. And trust me, I will try to respond to those questions. Make sense? So let's focus on for today, one variable, yeah? And then within one variable, how we can assess poverty. I thought it would be important because not necessarily all of you will be using multiple deprivation at the same time. Sometimes you need to look at one dimension, which is perfectly fine to do, yeah? If that suits your context. In that context, it is going to be useful. Multiple dimensions, I will come tomorrow. From tomorrow morning. Yeah?
So here the sum of the weight will not be equal to 1.
You don't have to be. Yeah? Okay. So, features, it's intuitive because literally you are taking the probability masses and taking a weighted sum. That's all. It is additively decomposable. You can break down across subgroups. What is good that it is sensitive to the depth of deprivation because you are giving different weights to different level of deprivation. I will show you one example. Although the weights do not sum up to 1, it sounds like the overall value cannot be more than 1 because they are just weighted sum of probabilities. Probabilities cannot be more than 1. It turned out the overall value lies between 0 and 1. 1 means highest level of poverty, 0 means lowest level of poverty. And for k equal to 1, the measure just turns out to be a head-count ratio. So when you have one category of deprivation only, so open defecation is the only category of deprivation, then your measure is just the head-count ratio. So it is intuitive in that sense. Yeah? Okay. Let me see an example. Yeah, there you go. An example in the next slide. Yeah? So look at the sanitation ladder. One way of doing weights is just rank-based weights that was suggested by Bennett and Hatsumasuga. Yep. So this is the poorest one. You assign a weight of 1. Second poorest, unimproved, you assign a weight of 3/4, 2/4, 1/4. And then this one doesn't reflect any deprivation, non-poor, you assign a weight of 0. Now you will be asking, why these weights? Well, at least this weight satisfies this restriction and is intuitive, what people understand. It's just rank test, right? But that is not the only way, and that's why you need to do robustness test. That's why you need to do dominance analysis as well. Yeah? But this is one way of putting weights. To the rank, it satisfies the restriction. Less deprivation has less weights. More deprivation is more weights. So if you do this, it will be sensitive to depth of deprivation. Fine, it satisfies your properties. Yeah?
So there are 5 categories. So why we take 4?
Because 4 categories of deprivation. Right? This is the most deprivation, poorest, second poorest, third poorest, fourth poorest. So you have, because this is non-poor, this is 0. Now, if you had R group, this is non-poor as well. This would have been 0, and we would have done 1, 2/3, 1, 2/3, and 1/3. Sounds good? So they have just taken, if you have 4 categories, they are saying rank-based waste and so on. But it satisfies the criteria, but that is not the only weight. You can have infinite to many possible weights. And that's why dominance test is very crucial. Okay. So you can see then our poverty measure is basically P1, which is the weight of 1, P1, W2, P2, W3, P3, W4, P4. That's your poverty measure. Okay, and that satisfies all the beautiful things that we wanted it to satisfy. So I am not first creating the poverty measure and then try to show you what it does. I first decided these are things I want. And that, through mathematical derivation, gave me this simple measure. Okay? It's very important before you try to measure anything, question yourself, do I need it? If not, you have to find the suitable measure that serves your purpose.
So this is simply like more derivation. We are assigning more weights and progressively lesser weights to lesser derivation, and we're taking the ratio.
What do you mean ratio?
I mean ratio. I'm taking like 3, 4, 5 in terms of.
No, it's just the weights. Weights because exactly.
The weights are non-integers.
Yeah. They have the highest weight is going to be 1.
One and then progressively lesser.
It will be lesser. Yeah.
So just this simple thing, it will meet all the conditions that will properties so that
For this one, if you go here, it satisfies this restriction, right? 1, and subsequently it is going down, and for the non, that can be any weight. This is what Kenneth and Hatzimasuda used, so I showed you. But it can be any weight, and that's why if in the paper we also propose how to test dominance.
But if we do like if we write a research paper, then we have to justify that for how we take the weights.
Yes, the weights will be in this category, that's for sure.
Yes.
In this category, it could be anything. Yeah, but then eventually, if it is a good research paper, you have to show the dominance analysis. Sounds good? Any other questions? Okay. Now the question is, what we have done, we have shown you, okay, if you have this restriction, it satisfies them. That means if a poor moves from a poorer category to less poorer category, poverty measure will go down. That is what we had in our last result. But the question is, how do we ensure that a policymaker has the incentive to help the poorest of the poor first? Remember, that's where we did FGT in Cardinal World and other measures, right? Satisfying transfer. Here, how do we do it? You cannot just transfer open defecation to unimproved. Can you? We can transfer money, but we cannot transfer categories. So how is it going to work? How do you operationalize? This is something we call precedence. So how to provide precedence to poorer people over the less poor people. This is called the prioritarian view that we were talking about it yesterday. So what Sen did, Sen used the concept of egalitarian view. They give similar results most of the time. Prioritarian view, on the other hand, says benefiting people matter more, worse off they are. It makes sense, right? It has this moral side. If a person is poorer, should be targeted first, should receive more priority. So, the prioritarian point of view, we are going to try to operationalize through the concept of providing precedence to poorer people. Let's see how we do it. So, suppose we have 10 categories. It's just an example. Yeah, it works with 5 categories, 4 categories, however. So suppose we have these 10 categories. So we have these 10 categories, starting with there C1, C2, C3, and so on. C7 is the deprivation category, the cutoff. So from C7 onwards, it goes and shows higher level of deprivation. C1 is the most deprivation. C7 is the least deprivation. But C8, C9, C10, they are all non-poor. Okay? So, what is providing precedence to poorer? So, suppose we have one situation where we could move one person, everything else unchanged. We could move one person from the poorest category to the second poorest category, to move that person from C1 to C2. Yeah? And we have an alternative option of moving one person from C2 to C3. Now my question to you, which of these two situations, here also poverty has gone down, right? One person has moved from poorest to second poorest category. The poverty must have gone down by monotonicity, ordinal monotonicity. Here also a person has moved from C2 to C3. Poverty should go down by ordinal monotonicity. My question to you, what do you prefer? Should we have larger reduction in poverty here or larger reduction on poverty here? So you expect first one to have larger reduction. Why?
Because extreme poverty.
The poorest person has moved one category rather than second poorest. Perfect. Okay. This is called minimum precedence. This is you require at the minimum. That if a poorer person moves one category, that should lead to larger reduction in poverty. Perfect. We all agree? What about this situation? You have an option of moving the poorest person one category, but the second poorest person two category. Which one would you prefer to have larger reduction in poverty? Okay. Who prefers? So now let's do a vote. So you have option this one, option this one. So please raise your hand if you feel that you should have larger reduction in poverty there. Please raise your hand. Okay. And who thinks you should have larger reduction in poverty there? So you see, you are divided. That is why I never, in normative economics, I never give you an answer that is the answer. Because there's a norm involved. Yeah? I cannot say any one of you is wrong. You may have your justification. So, if you think that you see, yesterday we were talking about inequality averseness. In Atkinson, somebody may choose alpha equal to -1, somebody, depends on certainty equivalent. We all have different certainty equivalent. If you think, if you are so strong, your aversion to poverty is so strong that you are saying, I will still choose that requiring, more poverty reduction than this one, then it satisfies the precedence of order 2. Now, you may not like it. You may just say, fine, I'm happy with the minimum. Here it is just getting too much. Oh, I give you a third option. And the option is, you can either move the poorest person one category, or you can move the second poorest person to the largest. Now, please tell me, how many of you would rather prefer this one? Please raise your hand. No one. And who would prefer this one, moving the second category? Many of you, right? Now, there could be people, Rawlsian view, who believe the poorest person situation should be improved unless that is improved, while leaving them behind. If you follow that rule, then here you are saying this is the maximum possible precedence. I am giving the first dollar to the poorest person. It does not matter any other non-poor people wherever they go. I have to focus on the poorest. I'm not going to leave them behind. Then you are satisfying the maximum precedence. Yeah.
Like in the first place, if we are working to improve the condition of the poorest people, then we are also putting the maximum pressure of a person being employed in the system, isn't it?
What do you mean?
As of now, it is the C1 is the maximum.
C1 is the maximum potential deprivation that anyone in the society can face. Right? So suppose open defecation.
Right.
No, open defecation is a deprivation. Now suppose you have 10 million people there. So you could have an option of moving that one person or a group of people, same number of people, from there to one category up, versus another situation where you are moving that second category of deprivation, unimproved or whatever, and making that person as high as possible. So you have to choose between these two. Which one do you choose?
Still the first person.
If you still choose the first one, then you are giving maximum precedence to the poorest. That's the concept. Now look, these are degree of precedence. I do not accept all of you on the same category. It's a choice. And that's what policy design is all about. A leader can have a left-wing view, can have a right-wing view, can have a centrist view. Depending on the preference, policymakers' preference, will choose something. And it should be open to all. Who am I to dictate? I'm giving you options. And your understanding. If you are choosing something, you should have an understanding what you are choosing. That's what. So I'm just empowering you with your knowledge. What you do with your knowledge is totally up to you. Some of you may say, happy with precedence. Some of you may say, no, maximum precedence. The poorest situation has to be improved, no matter what. I'm perfectly fine with that. As long as you justify and as long as you know what you are doing. That should be it.
Section, like for example, the shifting is happening rapidly. For example, from C8 to C5 it is happening.
From C8
to C5, like rich people is going to be like if something like that is happening, it would be on that. Because we won't consider after C7, we are not considering them now.
Because that is the focus property, right? By focus property or in poverty analysis, you do not care about the non-poor.
So if people is going to be poor,
that will increase poverty.
Yeah, it will be account for that.
Yeah, that will increase poverty. So if in the next period you are counting all these people, right? So if somebody non-poor comes here, receives a positive rate, so of course that will increase poverty. Of course. Any other questions? Did it make sense? Yeah.
So like depriving open defecation and then
Louder, please. I can't hear you.
okay, means the people don't have latrines, let's say. Okay, so government are building latrines for them, and they are above that category now. So how do you conquer that? They are from 0 to 1 directly because they have now latrines. So
yeah, so you are just moving from here to there.
Yes. So like those situation does not count now, the weights or how they change now.
Lost.
Means government are building, means have a program like they have building latrines for the people don't.
Yes.
Yeah. So now you cannot categorize, they are directly going to the C7 directly without being evolving to C2, C3, C4.
No. What I'm doing here, I'm giving you the hypothetical situation. Okay. You are talking about a particular situation. Anything can happen. But I'm telling you, asking you, if you choose between them, which one will you choose? Because that will decide how much weight you will give to each category. I will show you. I'm giving you the hypothetical, but in your particular situation, it can happen. But that does not preclude you from, when you are designing the poverty measures, you have to include all possibilities. You are talking about one possibility, but you cannot guarantee that that possibility will hold for everybody. Now, if my possibilities are satisfied, that will satisfy your possibility as well, because your possibility is one of the all possible categories, all possible possibilities. Yeah. So if we satisfy this one, your criteria will be satisfied too. Yeah. Let me show you how it works. Then we can again take some questions. So you can see minimum precedence of different order, maximum precedent, right? Now, moving one poor person to an adjacent less deprived category lead to a larger reduction in poverty than moving a less poor person up to an alpha number of categories. It could be alpha could be 1, alpha could be 2, alpha could be 3, whatever. With this is defined, right? It could be 1 category, it could be 2 category, and so on. Now, depending on that, of course, you will get different set of weights. So if suppose you say, okay, I want minimum precedence, and that's fine. We do not anything beyond minimum precedence. If you want to give priority to the poorest, that means moving the poorest one category versus moving the second poorest one category. You want larger poverty reduction in the first case. If you want that, it will include your case as well. Then you need to have further restriction on weights. So you cannot just say rank-based weights are not going to work. You need something stronger than rank-based weight. And it turns out that the difference between the subsequent category ranks has to be greater than the other. I will show you with an example how it works. Yeah. Similarly, if you want maximum precedence, then you have to have these particular conditions. The first one gets 1, The second category, deprivation category, will get less than half of the first. Third category will get less than half of the second, and so on. So you see, you are putting relatively much more weight on the poorer categories. He's just assigning these different weights. Now you can choose any weights in these categories, but in the end, if you are not satisfied with your choice, you are dominance analysis. So the dominance conditions are referred in the paper. Yeah.
In case of an individual, let us say we have a variable, ordinal scale variable.
Yeah.
Individual can use both the resources, like the ones which are less deprived, and also the ones which are most deprived. For example, in case of sanitation, the household is using toilet facilities which are not deprived. They also sometimes will go for open defecation as in rural areas. So how do we categorize them?
Say it again. I'm lost. Sorry.
So
My brain is slow.
yeah. So we have in your example we have 10 categories.
Suppose we have hypothetically 10 categories,
Yes.
and all these 10 categories are ordered.
Yes. Of which some of them are less deprived and some of them are most deprived.
More deprived, yeah.
Yes. If a household uses or an individual uses both of these categories, let us say.
Interesting. So what you could say in general in survey it is also asked which category is primarily used. Because in general, there could be situations where it's hard to distinguish. But you could always ask them, for example, drinking water. So they use different sources. So you will see in survey 2 or 3 sources. But it is also asked which source do you use primarily use for cooking? Which source do you primarily use for hand washing? So you have to define which one you want to take. There will be some assumptions. You have to make some assumptions. Look, when you work with survey or we work with data, there is no perfect world. You have to make some assumptions. Okay, how it is going to work and so on. So you have to make some of these assumptions and then create these categories. I don't have a perfect solution. Even for cooking fuel, it is not that they are using one type of cooking fuel. They can use chula, they can have the stove. They're using for different purposes. The question is how often they are using the gas, electricity, LPG, how long they are using the biomass fuel. If they're primarily using biomass fuel, you have to just assume they're using biomass fuel. It also depends on the context. When a country moves quite further, some days ago, there was one paper where actually the level of deprivation was too high. They're using, if a household even use a biomass fuel even for 5 minutes per day, I identify that person as poor. Now, this person has a stronger norm. Now, of course, the headcount, the deprivation in that deprivation rate in that particular category was 95%. Is it acceptable? I do not know. It's probably too far. But that's some of the choices that you have to make. I don't have a perfect solution for that. You need to do the data analysis, and based on what you observe in the data, you have to make some assumptions. Okay? Sorry, I don't have a perfect answer for that.
It makes sense.
How long do I have? 2 minutes? No, 2 minutes. You see, I have to finish. Anyways, I've spoken too much. I will not take much time. I'll just show you a few slides and then I will stop. So, if you are, say, this one, W2 is giving minimum precedence. So now we are not just using ranks, we are just squaring. We are taking the squares of these rank values. That will satisfy, because you see, when you take squares, the difference between these two is greater than difference between these two and difference between these two and so on. If you want to satisfy maximum precedence, then the weight in the second category has to be less than half of this category. This one has to be less than half of this. This one has to be less than half of this and so on. Now I have just used some numbers. You may not be happy. You may want different numbers as long as they fall in the range. But then you do robustness test. Then you do dominance analysis. Okay? Let's revisit the example. So this is the slide you already saw. Let me go to the next slide. So you have 4 categories reflecting deprivation. The first measure, you use headcount ratio. You just take the proportion of people who has at least one of these deprivations. If we do that, let's focus on 2 sets of numbers. Dhaka, you have 74.8. It reduces in 2011 to 68.4. Rajshahi again reduces from 74 to 61.2. Larger reduction in headcount ratio, right? Both are statistically significant. Sylhet reduced from 70% to 64.6, statistically significant, right? We first use T1. T1 is minimum precedence. When you use minimum precedence, you see here 50 to 42.6, but this one 55 to 41.6. Look, already the level of poverty is changing when you take the depth into account. Compared to Dhaka, Rajshahi is much poorer actually when you take the depth. Without the depth, as if they were same. Okay. Now let's go and come here. You have here you see it's still Rajshahi is still better off, right? Let's quote. You take the second order precedence and then you take the maximum precedence. Look, this difference is gone. Okay. This one is also interesting. Here you had a reduction with head count. P1 you still have a reduction. Here it is coming closer. Look, if you do maximum precedence, actual situation has gone worse because you remember at the beginning, the poorest of the poor, their situation worsened. So if you put more weight on them, actually poverty situation worsened. So depending on what weight you use and how much precedence you are providing to the poor, that's a normative judgment. Results change, results differ. So you ought to be careful. Yeah. Anyways, I am not covering dominance, but dominance conditions is there in the paper. If I had 2 hours, I would have covered, but anyway. So again, lessons. First of all, when you are in the ordinal variable context, it is different from your moving away from the cardinal variable context. So you cannot just blindly use, you cannot just take the values of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and then apply an FGT. It is not the right approach. Because you'll be missing out a lot, and anyway, those distances do not make any sense. What is the difference between open defecation and unimproved? Is the same as unimproved versus the next category? No. We just know the order, and that's it. The theorem, based on your order, gives you some restriction on weights. You can choose any weights within that restriction as long as they satisfy the restrictions. It's very important. Sounds good? And if you're not happy with the choice, you have the dominance test. The results are there in the paper as well. Dominance tests are very important. We just cannot create a measure and say, okay, let's do for publication. People want a complete paper. Even in your research paper, you have to bring those completeness. Keep on doing different tests and so on so that your findings are concrete. You do not leave loose ends. It's very important. Yeah, so you have to give a complete package, as complete as possible. Revise, revise, revise. Do different tests so that your results are robust. Then you hit good jobs. Okay, I have to stop here. If you have further questions, next session is starting in 15 minutes. 15.